One of the special guests on Manticon this year, and you've been here last year too, right?
Yeah.
Is Gary Chalk. I don't think I have to introduce him really, because I guess everyone knows his artwork here in the room for like Einsamer Wolf, for Warhammer, and so you've been around in the fantasy scene, fantasy artists for quite some time.
Outside lots and lots of police stations.
It is. How did you manage?
It was an accident. I never touched her. No, I am quite well known for the Lone Wolf illustrations, but I've done lots and lots of things since then.
Okay, and as we can see, you're a traditional artist. You're still working everything with pencils, with colors. Yeah. In an age and a time where most people are switching over to digital.
From the point of view of speed, I can do a drawing like this guy here. That took me about half a day to think of the idea and do a pencil rough drawing, and about 1 day to draw it. Now, you might just about do that quicker on a computer, but I've got my doubts. So, rather with the idea of you can't teach an old dog new tricks, I'm going to stick with what I know, probably. So, there we are. A kind of rambling answer, but that's the truth.
And you've also got quite a unique technique. We've been talking about some of your colored pictures before, and you kind of lay down for me what are the steps and how is that going to work, because it's very unusual. Can you repeat that?
Well, yes. I'll just grab one. Hang on a moment. Right, here we are. Here we are. This is what we're talking about here. Shall I take this out of the folder here because it's a bit shiny? And you might lose some of the exquisite handmade detail, not done on a computer. There we are. Now, I've kind of like, I'm somebody who went to art school and learnt nothing, in reality. They all wanted us to be account executives for advertising agencies. So the idea of actually drawing anything kind of went by the board. So I left art school with a degree. In England, it's a BA degree, which we always joked stood for bugger all, which means basically nothing. So I went and I was a graphic designer for a while, and I started getting illustration jobs, freelance, before I finally went freelance. And a lot of what I would do in those days was illustrations like this, black and white. And I kind of developed my own way of doing the colour pictures, really in a sort of self-taught manner. So I use this method that's a bit unusual. So what I do is I get a pencil drawing. This is all drawn in pencil first, quite carefully. Although all the things like the texture of the leaves and the individual little twigs on the trees will probably be left off. I then trace that onto a sheet of thicker art paper. And I paint certain areas all over with a sort of usually a dirty brown wash of acrylic paint. In this case, it would be all the background, except for this figure here in green, Lone Wolf. And I use it to kind of unify the picture. And then I start to paint several coats of liquid watercolour, one on top of the other, until I get a kind of a brightness that is about right. And over the top of that, I work with thin coats of gouache, usually in darker colours, and then over the top, because I cannot bear not to draw, I think it's some sort of like obsessive, compulsive thing, I have to draw over the top with varying sizes of felt tips. So you end up with a result like that, which is, as far as I know, unique, but it may be unique because other people have tried it and said it's not very good, rather than because it holds any special merit. Next question.
Next question. I was going to remark that about that it works very well because the brighter colors really pop out, and still you've got the strong shadows. But yes. What do I know?
No, you do. And I mean, I've done that on the other ones as well. I mean, this is one that's a drawing that is tinted. This is basically one of the black and white drawings here, just tinted with transparent colours, and you can see that there is a difference. The texture given by the black lines tends to make it overall less vivid in colour.
I think some fantasy artists go about the work saying that it's fantasy, it doesn't have to work as long as it looks cool, but you're very much into the details, that it works, that the clothes work, that the weapons work.
And fans, such fans as I have, actually do email me sometimes and say the thing we like is that it feels that it's all kind of working. And this is partly because I think it should, and partly because I've got a hobby of military history and things, and I know about suits of armour and joints on them, and I did bits of fencing and things, so I'm very dubious about doing huge swords with great blades that look like shovels, because not only would you not be able to actually lift them, they would be completely appalling for fighting with, because they'd be unbalanced. So I try to make a new-looking suit of clothing or a new-looking piece of armour that's not historic, but I do try to make it work. So I don't go quite into the heroic extremes that, for example, the Games Workshop artists and sculptors do, where you have, a guy in a suit of armour, and he's got a sword with a blade that's about as wide as it's long, and then he's got big spikes on his hat. So if he lifts up his sword, he cuts the spikes off, and then on the end of the spikes is a skull, and on each skull is a spike, and it goes on, and it's just none of it works. And it's me, you see, I just find that a bit daft, but that's each to his own.
You've done a lot of art that's kind of been the first of its kind. You set down kind of the look for several franchises. And how do you feel about when you see other people taking that over and kind of working with your style? And
I say, I want that money, and they're stealing it. That's how I feel about it. No, it's true. I mean, like I did the game board for Talisman and things like that years and years ago. And that was kind of the first of its kind like that. But I mean, you can't say like if Henry Ford invented motor cars, you can't complain now that Porsche make a motor car. It doesn't really matter. I'll go on and invent something else new, probably, one day. So there we are. No, I don't mind it at all. I really don't. And it all adds to the fun and merriment of human life, doesn't it? The more variety, the more things we do like this, great.
is there still anything where you say, I can still learn something, I can still refine anything?
Yeah. Oh, I do that all the time. Because every time I draw something, you see, I'll spend like a day doing this little drawing here, you see, and I'll be scribbling away, and I think, I must do this hair I'm so tired of drawing it like that. I wonder if I drew curls like that. So I try it. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. But then, when the drawing is finished, I go, oh, great, it's done. I want to like that now. Oh, the little mistake there, and I touch it out with a piece of white paint, and I rub out all the pencil marks, and I go, yes. And then I send it off to the client, and or I send a scan now, usually. So then I look at the piece of work and think, I don't like that bit there. And I put it in a drawer, and I really don't want to look at it for about, 3 months or something, 6 months. And then I look at it and I think, yeah, it's all right. And then I'd go, I quite like the way I did those curls on the hair, because that was different. And it's like, when I go to an art gallery, everybody else is going, oh, wow, isn't this picture great? And I'm going, look at those little leaves down in the corner there, like that. And I do look at the picture and I do enjoy it, but I've got this tendency to look at these little bits so I can steal somebody else's idea and try it myself. So I do try, within the realms of it being, people are employing me to use, say, this style or this style, because they want that. But within that, I do try new techniques. I mean, this was a bit of a new technique for me, and I had in mind that I wanted to look at a bit like the style of French comic books, French comic book covers. So I did try that. So you can teach an old dog new tricks to a certain extent, but it's a bit limited. Also, there's the question of time. You see, sometimes people ask for things in a ridiculous time span, or they don't want to pay me very much. So if I say I'll do it because it sounds interesting, I think in order to make a profit, I can't spend a month on it. I can only spend a week and a half. So I will stick to a style that I can do without thinking too much about something new, because I don't have the time to do that. Also, there is always the risk that if I tried something completely new, like getting textures using my thumbprints or something like this around the back, and you can do things like that, if it didn't work, I would have to start the job again, and I would lose, whatever time I'd gained. So there's always this kind of trade-off between doing something new and time.
I'm also wondering how kind of the industry changed. You just talked about ridiculous time frames and not very good payment. How did it start out, and how has it developed from them? Have the people more specific interests now in what they want?
How's it gone? Right. Well, I've been illustrating Man and Beast for about 30 years, I suppose, or 35 years. And it's changed quite a lot, not necessarily for the better. Now, you may say, Gary Chalk is an old fart, and he is getting nasty and grouchy in his old age. But what has happened is, don't forget, I don't just do fantasy games and stuff, I also do children's books. And that has changed a lot. The whole world of publishing is in turmoil because of several things. Firstly, you have Amazon, which is forcing all the little independent bookshops to close. So this means that the publishers do not have as many outlets for their books, and they're looking for books that are an absolute certainty to sell with the greatest number of people. Unfortunately, they have no mental mechanism to do this. They just make a guess. And what it means is, in a lot of times, they don't want you to do something new. They want you to do something that's just like the last big success. So we had the spell of vampire books for young ladies who like to get bitten in the neck. So you would go to a major bookshop like Foyle's in London, and there would be one wall of young fiction, and the whole wall would be black with white lettering and a little bit of red on it, because of the desire to have a certain seller. And of course, it's the way that you're not going to have a big seller. So you have that. Then you have the terror of the tablet. The terror of the tablet. The iPad, the Kindle. Yeah, I've got a Kindle, and I download the equivalent of paperback books on it because they're cheaper than the paper version. They're no less good to look at because a paperback, apart from the cover, is not a very artistic object. It's printed on toilet paper, as we call it in the trade. Seriously, we call it, in England they call it bog paper. That's like toilet paper. It goes yellow. The pages fall out when you've read it 3 times. It's not a great work of art. So that's affecting their sales of paperback books. And just general terror when I talk to editors. We also have the thing that because publishers have agglomerated over the years, one has taken over another, we now have less and less book publishers. So you're getting less and less variety. There's less and less places to sell your work. So if you go to the editor-in-chief of children's books in one of the major 5 publishers, that's it, because they're the major 5. There used to be in London, 200 different publishers. Now there might be 30 or something like that. So all this is gradually narrowing down the market, which means there's less people to, hit over the head and say, look at my work. There's less people who are willing to take a risk, and they're less willing to pay any money for you to do the work because they say they're suffering financial losses, which always strikes me as curious, because I've never been to a poor publisher. Publishers used to be 1 or 2 buildings in a street knocked together, old buildings, and you go in and there'd be about 10 or 20 people. Now they're on 3-4 floors of a tower block, and you go in and there's loads of people with one piece of paper and a cup of coffee, and they're walking around continuously, yeah, and there are lots of them, they all have to be paid. Yeah, so I think that this is maybe where the money's going. But for children's illustration, they are not still paying me what they paid me 10 years ago. It hasn't gone up, except for the Americans, God bless them, who pay possibly double what the English pay. The French, you never know. You never know what you're going to get. I mean, I'm doing some drawings for a guy who is, believe it or not, building a medieval town as a tourist attraction. And he sends me the plans of the buildings, and I work them up into like a medieval inn with happy drunken peasants outside and things like this. And he pays me about the going rate. That's quite good. But it has got very strange over the years. Games as well, who knows where that's going. You've got the big, slowly dying giant that is Games Workshop, which seems intent on committing commercial suicide. They only do the Games Workshop games and less of those. They're not doing little offshoot games. They're not doing more time. They're not doing other things. So their use for illustrators and game designers is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. But then you have things like Kickstarter, which has now become the number one way to get your game published. And I'm doing one. I'm doing one for the Lone Wolf board game. Watch this space. And that's going to be quite good, he said, lying. No, it's fine. It's fine. But I've never done one before. So may work, may not. But what you've gone is, in my case, somebody who can maybe design a game or do a big series of illustrations and be certain that they're going to get paid for it, to somebody who has designed complete projects, present them to people who may or may not be interested, or to cast my bread on the internet waters and hope that somebody says, I like that, I'm going to pay this lunatic 20 euros, 50 euros, or even, let's hope, 150 euros, and get the deluxe copy of the Lone Wolf board game, available here. And that's how it works. So it's all got much chancier. I'm now, as I say, quite old, and I could just about retire and still live in the style to which I have become accustomed. But if I was 20 or 21 and I was leaving an art school and I really wanted to be an illustrator, I really wanted to make games, I don't know how they would find enough work that pays enough to have a small client base and learn enough skills to become expert. They would have to do the job in combination with a second job. They would either have to be a graphic designer, or they'd have to teach, or they'd have to have a market stall selling potatoes or something so that they could earn enough money to live. Now, this is quite, I know I joke about, but this is quite serious for things like the future of Western culture, because it means that they will never develop these skills to get to a high level. So you will get people driven by financial constraints down to bad management and stupidity, employing people who are not expert to do work as cheaply as possible to sell to a public who has got lots and lots of other forms of entertainment now, and eventually, if nobody is careful, it will take a nosedive and you will get worse and worse products. And I think that's a terrible shame, because I think all this adds greatly to the richness of everybody's culture. It's great fun. For example, games, they make us sociable people. A game played on a tablet or on a screen is great. A game played between 10 guys and 6 large bottles of beer over an evening is great, but it's sociable. People like books because they talk to you about emotions, personal development. When you're a child, you can learn about how the adult world functions, how other children think. And this is all vitally important. And the idea of it all taking a nosedive because of commercial pressure, because of big companies bullying little companies, because of people who don't know what they're doing really, and people who are forced to stay at a kind of amateur stage of development, I find quite worrying. Now, that's me being serious for a moment, so we can stop that there and get back to rubbish. Would that be any good?
No, well, I was about to ask what you would tell someone who's just starting out, but I guess you would say don't.
Well, I'd say go and work in the City of London and earn lots of money, do it for 3 years, then stop and become an illustrator or something like that. I really don't know how an ordinary person is going to do it. How can I put it? Before you can draw something like that, okay? Now, you've got to do really quite simple stuff. You do little drawings that go on people's business cards. You do, I used to put together, when I was a graphic designer for a while, I used to do things like pizza boxes, shampoo boxes. I used to draw instructions for how to wire up your model railway layout and all this sort of thing. But I learned so much. But I had time, because I was earning enough money, to say, I'll try drawing this. No, I don't like that. Throw it away. I'll try drawing this and don't like that. And then I draw things and think, that's quite good. I'll send it to half a dozen publishers, see if they want to employ me. I just don't see how this is going to work anymore. And I think it's quite important. Look what's happened to music. Music kind of imploded, didn't it? Now everything is a download, and the only way a band makes any money is by touring, not by selling downloads, because there's not enough money in it. So I think it's something that's quite important.
Yeah, that is quite a depressing note.
I do my best.
Maybe we could open this for questions from the audience.
So why don't you take it on the road? I mean, you're not sitting in your workshop now.
No.
Is there an equivalent for very talented graphic artists who's starting out to do something other than a freelance?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of. I think a lot of people who want to draw end up working for things like animation games companies. In France, there's a lot of work in comic books, but you still have to get to some stage above kind of like, just got my degree, knowing nothing. You've got to get just kind of some little level above that to get to be employable. One thing about the internet means you can show everybody your work, which is quite good. But where it's going to end, I'm not sure. There is this kind of gap between being a trainee or somebody with no experience and the next level up. And I don't know what employment there is to fill it. Some people are doing things like they're producing their own comic books, say, online, or they're doing prints. I'm thinking of doing limited edition prints, for example. But whether you would make an entire living out of it, I have my doubts. And I think it's kind of sad. I mean, authors are having more trouble getting their books through the editorial decision process. I know this for a fact. I work with a children's book writer in England, and he and I said, that we're sending in odd ideas to people, and he admits to me he has no more idea now of how to get a book published than when he started, and he's had 100+ books published. So it's kind of got to the stage where we've got a sort of arthritic, sclerotic machine that's not really able to adapt to the new circumstances, and all the people who actually produce the work are kind of stuck in the middle, is my impression. Do you find the same thing? I mean, being rich, successful, and gorgeous, do you still find the same problems with publishers, or?
No, the people I work with, I've been working with now for 30 years.
Yeah.
So I just write. I don't worry about the commercial at all.
All right.
After you've done 20, 30 books, the reprints start taking over, and I could have stopped working 10 years ago, and I still been making.
You see, it used to be like that with illustrators. We would, you would start to work for a publisher, and you would do them 5 little drawings to go in a children's book, and they'd say, that's great. Well, if we get anything that's like that again, we'll call you. And you'd hang around, and then finally, sort of 6 months later or something, they say, oh, look, we're a bit stuck. Can you do us a quick colour cover or something? And you would build up a rapport with them, and you would have maybe 3 or 4 of these different people that would be giving you work, and they would overlap sometimes, and you would have a kind of, if you were competent, a full order book. Whereas now, you go to work for a children's publisher, certainly, and you do the job, and then that person goes. They're in another job, and you start again. It's like constantly starting your career over and over again. One of the biggest things in children's books, one of the big problems, is pregnancy. I'm not joking. In the children's book sector, certainly in the UK, and I think probably in America, the vast bulk of the editors are part-time women. That doesn't mean that the rest of the week they're men. It means that they are women who work for 2 days a week at the publishers, then they're 3 days at home, and then it goes on like that. So you're sending in work for them, and you ring up to say, oh, did you get so-and-so? And they say, oh, she's not here today. She's at home today. Oh, well, we'll leave it a couple of days. And then after about 2/3 of a book, she has become pregnant because she's part-time wife, part-time worker, and off she goes to have her baby, and you get a new editor, and you start again. And this process goes on. And if you think I'm joking, I've recently done a series of 6 children's books for Hachette in London. Now, this took about 1.5 years to write and illustrate. First of all, we had an editor who left to have a baby. We then had 3 other editors, and then we had the first editor again, and she left to have a second baby. So this is in the course of one series of 6 books. You have 4 or 5 editors, all of whom you have to explain where you're going with it. You have to explain what you're doing with the illustrations. There's always a gap of understanding. And finally, we know for a fact that the 6th book in the series was not just not edited, it was never even read before being published. Because have you ever written a book that has not required 1 comma, full stop, or spelling error to be changed? Or 1 tiny detail in a drawing just to be made clear? Yeah, so we know for a fact because the 4th editor, who was leaving to have her baby, said, the manuscript's just arrived on the desk, but I've got to go off now because I think I'm going into labour. And the next editor will deal with it. And she never did. She thought the previous one had. So you have a major publishing company, publishing 6 books, one of which they have never read. It was about little furry animals dressed as fantasy characters. We could have had a sex scene between 2 badgers in chapter 3, and they would have never have known until it hit the shelves. And it's a level of kind of disorganization, incompetence, and sheer craziness that allows this sort of panic about books appearing on tablets to grow till it's a sort of virtually a frothing at the mouth incident in the middle of the publishers' offices. So there we are. Any more questions about real life in the wonderful world of fantasy illustration? Or, in fact, my part of it anyway. Come on, there must be a question.
Is there a problem not living in London or New York?
No.
Because
No. Well,
when I started, the artists would go into New York on Tuesday. And everybody would go in on Tuesday. And they would carry an armload of black and whites.
That sounds right.
Yeah, and you just line up at the door and walk by. It's kind of awful, actually.
Well, no, it used to be like that in Great Britain, because I live in France now, but I used to live in England, and I never lived more than about 2 hours train drive from London, and you could, as you say, go in with your portfolio under your arm. And very often I would go to see a publisher about some work, and I'd think, I'll go and see some other ones. So I used to go to see, Hamlin or something, and then I'd walk down the street, and I'd checked out their addresses and everything, and I'd go and bang on the door or something and say, look, I'm just passing, I've got all these drawings here. Can I see your children's editor, please? And they'd go, I'll just see if she's free. And then, in you go. Now, although I can work from anywhere in the world because of the internet, and certainly because I have an agent now, getting to actually see someone is almost impossible. That's another reason why youngsters find it so different. You can't blag your way into an office, plonk your drawings down and say, have a look, this is a nice one. Yeah? So you can't do that. It's all kind of total disinterest. And a weird thing has happened to myself and Alan Fruin, this guy I'm working with. We wrote a short children's book between us, and I did some sample illustrations. I mean, they're to this standard. I mean, they're not all rubbish. They're proper illustrations. We did a covering letter saying, I'm Alan Fruin Jones. I've published more than 100 books. I've done this, I've done that. We've got this series out. It's selling okay. Da, 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 da. This is a book which could be a series, and it's about a fox in a kind of steampunk world who is like a Sherlock Holmes detective. And we wrote a rollicking tale of stolen zeppelins, animal robots, crazed professors, and the usual merry fun. We wrote the whole book deliberately for a particular age group, for a particular market. We wrote the number of words that people said they required, and we did it almost as a tick-the-box experiment. We then selected 6 publishing houses, minor publishers in Britain, who said they were looking for exactly this sort of book. We sent the manuscript off and the sample drawings to 6 publishers. 3 did not reply at all. 2 replied and said, oh, thank you very much. This is not what we're looking for, but thank you for sending it in anyway. And then the last reply that we got 2 weeks ago was absurd. It implied that not only had they not read the manuscript, they hadn't even read the covering letter. They sent back a letter saying, I'm sorry, this isn't what we're looking for at present. Have you ever thought of getting an agent? If you want to get an agent, did you know you can buy a book called the Writers and Artists Yearbook? It's not very expensive. It's got all the addresses of agents in it, and you can find one. Right, so I've been drawing for 35 years. Alan's been writing for about the same time. It implies that they hadn't even read the covering letter. Now, if we're getting a response like that, what is somebody who's 20 and done it for the first time getting? So we weren't discouraged because, as we describe it, now I shouldn't really say this in front of the camera, but Alan and I describe this process as throwing shit at the wall and waiting till a bit of it sticks. And it's like, I don't know, it's like trying to attract the attention of a mental patient who's fixated on something else. And I don't honestly think it even really matters what it is you propose. It's a system designed to keep out ideas rather than to get them in. So the idea of going into New York on a Tuesday with your bundle of drawings under your arm is, I don't think you get past the door anymore, really. I've occasionally been to book fairs as well, one of which led me to hire my last agent, who was okay, because I actually bumped into a person who was an agent, physically bumped into her, and she used to be an editor of mine. And then I've recently through Twitter got a new agent in San Francisco, and she kind of headhunted me. When I went out to America on holiday, I said, oh, funnily enough, I'm going to go to San Francisco. And she kind of said, oh, do you want to come and have lunch? So I went and had lunch, and I said, look, am I here because you like my merry banter on Twitter, or are you trying to, like, do some business here, or what? So she said both. So I said, well, that's a good start. And she's taken me on as an agent. So these things are almost now entirely down to pure chance, in my opinion, which seems to be a strange way to run a business worth billions. So there you are. So where it's going to go, I don't know. Twitter's useful because I've recently started tweeting, and my son said, Dad, you've got to go on Twitter or Facebook because everybody thinks that you're dead. And he was right. He was right, because 3 days after I started tweeting, this tweet came up and it said, hey, look, at Gary Chalkpigs, he's still alive. I thought he was dead. And I really got that. So he was right all along. So I do a lot of tweeting, which helps. And funnily enough, I find jobs like this series of drawings I did for this role-playing game largely through Twitter. I've got a guy I met through Twitter. He's just sent me a request to do a cover for some sort of role-playing game in England, and it goes on like that. But it's completely hit and miss.
Okay.
I'm not really dead. I've just not been very well.
You're very well animated for.
Come on, now,
For
be
that guy.
serious. There's people paying good money to see this.
Have they? Okay. Any more questions from the audience, or?
No technical questions like what pencils I use or anything like. Okay.
Okay. I think we're going to wrap it up.
Okay.
I think we've got a full hour and more by now.
Yes, this is not the usual material that you get from anyone else. Anyway, everybody, have a look at the drawings. I hope you enjoy them, and thank you for listening so attentively. That's been great.
Thank you very much.